Hello everyone, I'm Jérôme Giercé, I'm the director of BOZAR Music here in Brussels, and I'm very happy to be with you here and with a very special guest in our From Ear to Hear series. From Ear to Hear series is actually taking place in the Hotel Beethoven project, the exhibition around Ludwig van Beethoven here in BOZAR. And today we have with us Paul Whittaker. Paul is with us from the UK. He is a pianist and an organist. He is a professional musician. He has degrees from various universities, but he is also deaf and is actually well known for his efforts to connect music to the life of deaf people. So he's running a charity to help deaf people to enjoy music. He's also signing music, making that people would actually be able to understand what music is and what the words of songs are. And he works also with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra in a project called Feel the Music. So, Paul, good afternoon. I hope you're fine.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you very much indeed for having me. I hope you can understand me fine.
I can understand you absolutely perfectly. Thank you very much. So the exhibition is open in BOZAR until the 14th of February. And we talk in this project of Beethoven as a musician, but also as a global icon present everywhere on the planet, an artist who is socially minded and connected to the world. So today I propose to go with Paul and with you through this broadcast into the reality of a professional musician in love with the music of Beethoven. Paul, I give you the word.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It's a huge pleasure to be with you today as part of your Beethoven celebratory event. And as a deaf musician, this 250th anniversary should have been a very exciting year for me. As well as the project with you in Brussels, I should have been doing a project in Vienna. I should have been going to Mexico City and Santiago. I had projects with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra in Germany and in France. But obviously, like most people, I have been stuck at home. But hopefully you can have a bit of fun with me this evening. And I should tell you that even though I am deaf and a musician, I am not a Beethoven scholar. I'm definitely not an expert, and I don't perform in public that often these days. As you heard, I play the piano and I play the organ. And simply because I'm deaf, lots of people ask me what I think about Beethoven. So what I'm going to do is share some of my thoughts about Beethoven, some of my own experiences, and those of some of my deaf colleagues. And maybe I will challenge you a little bit about how you hear, feel, and understand music. So I'm 56. I was born deaf, so I have never heard a full piano keyboard, and I cannot imagine my life without music. For me and for many other deaf people that I know, music is a vital part of our lives. And for 27 years in the UK, I did run a charity encouraging deaf people to get involved in music. For the last 5 years, I've been working freelance though, and I've been focusing a lot more on sign language and music. And all my life, I have had people asking me, well, how do you hear and understand music? People have told me that I'm wasting my time trying to encourage deaf people to make music. And I often find it funny when people come up to me and say, oh yes, Beethoven. He was deaf, wasn't he? Like they're not really sure. They don't want to appear too naive or stupid. I will always remember an American newspaper story back in 1983, which talked about a young deaf man named Whittaker, that's me, who lived in a small town, maybe 280 kilometers north of London, and who, despite being deaf, had got a place at Oxford University to read for a music degree. And this newspaper said that the reason I had achieved it was because when I sat down to play the piano, Beethoven would come to me and he would tell me what to play. Fake news is nothing new, and I learned very quickly that journalists won't let truth get in the way of a good story, because I have to say honestly, I have never heard from Beethoven. He has never sent me any messages at all, and the only way I do know him is through his music. But it's understandable that when people do meet a deaf musician, they will think of Beethoven. They think deaf and music is a paradox, and they will be curious to know just how a deaf person does make music. And people often ask me, well, how do you do it? And I very rarely give them an answer. What I usually do is turn it around and ask them, and I'm going to ask you in a moment, what music means to you. What does it involve? What does it sound like? Why does it move you? And how would you explain it to someone who can't hear it? So, Jerome, what would you say music is? How would you explain it to me?
Oh, it's a very good question. I think I would probably take you into the concert hall here when we have a full orchestra and make you touch a contrabass or an instrument that you could feel with your hands. I would say that for me, music is maybe, first of all, a source of joy and pleasure, an intellectual, but also an emotional and a physical pleasure.
That is one of the best answers anyone has ever given me. I don't know if you've thought about it in advance or whether it's just come to you now, but that's a really good answer. Because most people, they start thinking about hearing. You don't. For you, it's about a physical and an emotional experience of seeing an orchestra, seeing a musician. And most people do struggle to answer the question. It's something they never think about. For most people, it's something that's there, and they know what they like what they know. It goes in one ear and it goes out the other, and they rarely stop and think about it. Now, for me, it can't even go in one ear, never mind out the other. Hearing aids. Right? I can't, like you, just download a piece of music. I can't listen to the radio, go to a live performance and understand that piece of music. I can't tell what voice is singing. I can't tell what instrument is being played. Melody, rhythm, lyrics, form, any of that, I just don't get. It only makes sense to me when I actually see a score. Once I've got that printed music in front of me, I read that like you read a book or a phone message, and I know in my head exactly what it sounds like. That ability to read a score is something that I never remember being taught. I think perhaps being a pianist helps an awful lot, because being a pianist, I'm used to reading 2 stages of music, sometimes 3. As an organist, I'm used to reading 3 stages of music, sometimes 4. That's the same as trying to read a string quartet, and from there to a classical symphony orchestra is actually quite a small step. Staying with the piano for a moment, if you think about it, when you press a key down, you can feel that hammer hit the string. The vibrations will travel back up your arm, and every single note on that piano feels different. You know that that note you press is that note on the printed music. That one is that one there. So it's very easy to relate what you see to what you do and to what you feel. But that's with real pianos. Right? If you give me an electric piano or a keyboard, I hate it because you don't have that tactile sensation. You press a key down and you don't get anything back. And quite often the speaker, the sound source, is something separate from you anyway. There have been so many times in my life when I've sat down playing an electric piano and I haven't realized it's not switched on. Everybody going, oh, it's beautiful. That's probably because they can't hear me. No, it's just because you don't feel anything, it's impossible for me to play. And I think as well that that ability to read a score would be a lot harder for me if I played what I call a single stave instrument. I mean, if you think about most instruments, violin, cello, trumpet, clarinet, you just have one line of music that you follow. And I fail to understand sometimes how people cannot cope if they can only read a treble clef. No, I have to read treble clef and bass clef. And as I say, going to the piano and the organ, reading 3 or 4 staves, it's just something I can do quite automatically. But there are occasions when it frustrates me because you can't always buy a score for every piece of music. And some types of music, the music can't all be notated. If you think about jazz music, for example, a lot of that is improvised. It's not written down. If I played a lot more instruments myself, then it's possible that the technical knowledge I have and watching people play trumpet, violin, clarinet, saxophone, whatever, would allow me to work out what's going on. And with contemporary music, which is a challenge for a lot of people, whether you're deaf or not, sometimes you might have electronic elements, you might have quarter tone or some unusual playing technique or tuning, which can't be notated. And the musician in me always wants to know what a composer is trying to say and express. But I do sometimes have to admit that there are some types of music that I just cannot access as much as I want. It doesn't really bother me. And I always remember when I was at university having a conversation with my tutor, when one day he said to me, Paul, you are the easiest person I have ever had to teach. And I thought, oh, that's very nice. That's a compliment. Thank you. Why? And he said, well, it's because you're deaf. So is that really a compliment or not? And he went on to say that because of my deafness and relying on a score, I noticed far more information and far more detail than most students. Most music students, if you ask them to analyze a piece of music, will simply go away, listen to it. And there is a limit to what their ear can pick up and what their brain can work out. And I remember saying to him, but surely all music students can read a score. And I found it so hard to believe him when he told me that most music students can't do that. To me, it's so fundamental. It's a basic thing, having that in front of me. And it made me realize that I have assumptions about hearing people and hearing musicians in the same way that they have assumptions about deaf musicians. We all have assumptions about each other. And lots of people have assumptions about Beethoven. But before I do that, I've got an excerpt of music that I'd like to play for you. This is not an example of what music genuinely sounds like to a deaf person, but it might help a little bit. First of all, you will hear a bit of the Moonlight Sonata with all the frequencies. And then in 3 different stages, the higher frequencies are removed. And then at the end of it, you hear all 4 frequencies again. It's about 1.5 minutes, right? So I'll play that just to give people an idea of what music might sound like with a hearing loss. Here we go. This is not me playing, by the way, just so you know. Whether that helps people or not, I don't know. I can't tell any difference until we get to stage 3, which is the point at which most people go, oh, it stopped, there's nothing there. And then you realize there's a little bit of bass occasionally. That's with my hearing aids in. If I take my hearing aids out, I can't hear anything at all. As I say, it's not exactly how deaf people hear music, but it might give you some idea. I've got another little excerpt. This is part of Beethoven 9, so we've got a much bigger frequency range, and this is just over 1 minute. Okay, so here we go, Beethoven 9. So there we go. Obviously, it's completely different listening to a piece of music recorded as it is live. Like anyone else, I would much prefer to go to a live concert anyway, because you don't have the compression of frequencies. You can watch people. You can see the emotional reaction. Nothing can compare with live music. And next year, hopefully, we will have it back again. Anyway, let's move on. I said that I would talk a bit about Beethoven. Some people see him as this great triumphant figure, this mythological creature. And I have to perhaps disappoint people because I don't put him on a pedestal. I don't see Beethoven's deafness being an issue at all where music is concerned. Yeah, socially, it was a big problem. Of course it was. And mentally. That's very clear from what Beethoven wrote in the Heiligenstadt Testament. But from a musical point of view, the deafness really doesn't matter. And I say that because by the time Beethoven started losing his hearing in his mid-20s, he'd already learned so much about music and about composition. He knew about harmony, melody, orchestration. He knew about the technical capabilities of instruments. He needed to compose. He didn't need to hear it. He heard all that in his head, wrote it down in sketchbooks, worked it out, revised it, and he knew when it was right. And that, in my view, is how a composer works anyway. You can't really compose by sitting down at a piano, playing a couple of notes, writing them down, and then slowly working it out that way. It's something that's in your head, and then you put it down on paper. And very, very few biographers actually talk much about Beethoven's deafness or other aspects of his medical health. One book that does is this one. What a long title. That Jealous Demon, My Wretched Health, by Jonathan Noble. He had a whole chapter about deafness and of quite deep analysis of Beethoven's own deafness. The chapter that talks about deafness is called The Ultimate Blow. And it starts like this. The composer as a hero is probably epitomized by those who become deaf. It seems the supreme injustice. Many people ask how musicians can compose when they cannot hear the result of their labors. Beethoven showed that they can. He said, when seriously deaf, that of all his activities, composition was the easiest and that social interaction was the most difficult. And as a deaf musician myself, I would entirely agree with that. Obviously, if you can't hear, you're not going to be distracted by other noises and things. It's something in there, and you put it down on paper. And I wish that more biographers actually saw it that way, rather than being sensationalist. And Beethoven is, of course, the best-known deaf composer. But back in, I think it was about 2013, I took part in a weekend event in London, which was called the Beethoven Question. And one session looked at music and deafness, and it included a discussion between the composer Nigel Osborne, who used to be a music professor at Edinburgh University, and Lord Coleman, who has been deaf most of his life and is a clarinetist and a composer. Nigel, at that point, had been suffering from Meniere's disease, and he was beginning to lose his hearing quite badly. And he thought about how he coped with it as a composer. This is what he said. What I do is draw on my memories and the knowledge of sounds and colours of instruments and their different ranges, as well as what pictures sound like, how long they last. And I put all that together in my head. If I'm lucky, I can just do it with a quartet and I can hear it. With a complex symphonic piece, I have to put it together in my head and work it out section by section and then put it all together. Lord Coleman, as someone who was younger, he was diagnosed as being deaf when he was 5, had a very, very different angle. He said that when he arrived at his first composition lesson and said to his teacher that he was worried he didn't have access to a keyboard or a piano to write his music, his teacher said, that is a fantastic thing. It's an advantage. It's great that you don't have a piano or a keyboard to work with, and I want you to go back and spend the next year developing your inner ear as a composer. And Lloyd said that as a result of that, his compositional skill and his inner ear, that ability to hear things in his head, developed so much. Another composer who is known a little bit for his deafness is Michael Barclay. He was the son of Lennox Barclay, and Benjamin Britten was Michael's godfather. He became deaf in 2012 following an infection after having a cold. And he wrote at the time, "I often wonder what it's like for a composer to find music inaudible and even unbearable. In the last few weeks, I have known what it is like. An infection one night led to the sound of diabolical plumbing in my right ear. Sudden pain, gurgling, bubbling, and popping that never gave that final lurch into air." You know what it's like when you hold it out and you blow and you hear it pop. That's the kind of thing I was talking about, but he couldn't actually get that pop. He continued, "Next morning, I could hear nothing on that side, the right side. That would have been an inconvenience, was it not for the fact that I already have a severe hearing loss in my left ear, thanks to an operation as a child and exposure to ridiculously loud rock music when I was a young keyboard player. If I were facing a lifetime of this," he said, "I would be in despair. It would mean that I would never again hear great music, let alone my own works. In terms of composition, it meant that I have concentrated on simple things that I know I can hear accurately, such as a piece for unaccompanied cello or an anthem for Liverpool Cathedral. The loss of proper music sensation heightens my sense of what Beethoven arrived at in his late string quartets. Ideas that are stripped down to their essence, and the intensity of your involvement becomes more personal and more passionate." Now, I found as a deaf musician, Michael talking about that effect to be quite overwhelming. It's much harder anyway if you've been able to hear all your life, or see, or any other sense all your life, and then you suddenly lose it. You're fortunate in that you have all the memory of it, but it's completely different if you've never had it, in my case, or you've had it from a young age. For Nigel Osborne and for Michael Barclay and for Beethoven, all that musical knowledge was there, and they had all the memories. But with both with them and with Lloyd, there's an acknowledgement that Beethoven's example was something of an inspiration. It would be nice if Beethoven himself actually said more about his deafness and how he dealt with it, but he hardly ever said anything. And the fact that he didn't sometimes, I think, leads to some very bizarre opinions and views. I don't know if anybody remembers, but at the beginning of this year, there was some excitement when an American musicologist claimed that he had found evidence that Beethoven was not completely deaf when he premiered the Ninth Symphony, and he could actually hear a little bit for the next 2 years. This is actually based on what Beethoven wrote in a conversation book in 1823. A stranger approached Beethoven whose own hearing was going, and he was asking for advice. And Beethoven wrote in his conversation book, "Do not use mechanical devices," ear trumpet, "too early. By not using them, I have preserved some hearing in my left ear in this way." Now, this American guy said that this was compelling evidence and that this will be a game changer in the way we view Beethoven, realizing he could hear something when he premiered the Ninth Symphony. Really? I mean, my view is probably a bit cynical, but I think it's rather flimsy evidence on which to base the comment that he could hear his Ninth Symphony. Let's face it, if you look at the medical advice that was given to Beethoven at the time, go for a long walk in the country, do not conduct too much, then it's not really strong, sensible medical advice. And anyway, even if he could hear a little bit, it still wouldn't have any effect on his inner ear and his ability to compose. I have actually tried an ear trumpet for myself. Back in 2014, I was doing a project with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra at the Beethoven Hall in Bonn, and I visited the Beethoven house, and they let me try an ear trumpet. They're really not very good. Plus the fact that you can't actually play the piano or anything when you're holding a whopping great ear trumpet. Yeah. They're not practical things at all. Another theory I always remember about Beethoven was one that I read in the 1980s. This talked about the fact that Beethoven sawed the legs of his piano. He wanted the piano, apparently, to lie flat on the floor so that he could feel it and play it better. And this biographer also pointed out that when Beethoven died, this piano was in a terrible state. Beethoven used to play it so aggressively because he was very frustrated. I found that a bit of a joke, really. I mean, yeah, a piano will be in a very bad condition if you saw the legs off it. Why would anybody want to do that? It's an expensive thing. Why would you wreck it by cutting the legs off? I don't know about you, Jerome, but I have never met anybody who can play a piano which is lying flat on the floor. It's physically, it's really not possible, and the pedals won't work. So even if you look at Beethoven's late sonatas and the pedaling that he puts in, how would he know if he didn't have a piano with pedals? It's a crazy idea, but this is the kind of thing that people come up with. Like with me at the American newspaper, it makes a good story, but it's not a very convincing representation of deafness. Deafness in general is very, very misunderstood. I'm not going to give you a full history of it, but just a tiny bit of it. Up until the 17th century, the church told people that a child's deafness was the result of God punishing sinful parents. Deaf people were excluded from taking part in any kind of religious worship, and their status was somewhere down there. Quite often, they were kept away from the rest of society, and it was felt impossible to educate them. For a long time, deaf people were not allowed to make a will, and they were not allowed to inherit property from their families. They really were excluded people. By Beethoven's time, things had improved a wee bit, and some form of sign language had developed, though in German-speaking countries, the emphasis was very much on an oral education, so having to try and listen, lip-read people, and also forcing deaf people to learn to speak. During Beethoven's early years, the first oral school for deaf people in Germany was founded, and it was influenced by the work of a man called Konrad Amann, who believed that speech was the only thing that separated human beings from animals. So basically, he was saying deaf people are animals. Beethoven was therefore quite lucky. If he'd been born deaf, then it's doubtful whether he would have had much of an education at all, whether he would have had any access to music and become a composer. And it's quite strange that even though Beethoven is the most famous deaf person in history, probably, deaf history and deaf culture itself doesn't recognize him. Deaf people with a capital D largely ignore him because he became deaf rather than being born deaf, and also because he was a musician, which is a big negative for some deaf people. No music. They refuse to acknowledge Beethoven in any way at all. People have always been suspicious about musicians who are deaf. We know that Beethoven himself in 1801 was worried about the reaction of other musicians. And that kind of thing that Beethoven put up with still exists today. I know of a lot of professional musicians who, once they admit they have a hearing loss, find that all their work dries up. They have enough confidence in their own musical skill and ability, but promoters and management don't share that confidence. And if you're in rehearsal situations where you can't hear, it's very difficult to hide the fact that you have got hearing loss. It's such a shame because you could argue that the older you get, the more experience, the deeper your music becomes. And most people as they get older start to lose their hearing. If you spent your entire lifetime playing music, conducting or whatever, why should you suddenly be forced to stop just because your ears don't work anymore? That's really unfair. I encountered a huge amount of prejudice when I was younger. When I applied to university, I was turned down by 12 of them over 2 years just because I was deaf. I still get frustrated now because you have examination boards who refuse to acknowledge the needs of deaf candidates. And I'm not a fan of quotas, which is those situations where you have to employ or have a certain number of staff or students who are deaf, disabled, black, gay, whatever. We don't want to be patronized. We don't want things made easier because of our deafness. We want the same standards and we want the same qualifications as everybody else, not something less. We want to be known for our musical ability, not our deafness, because musicality is not related in any way to your ability to hear. Here's a quote from Ruth Montgomery, who is a deaf flute player in London. Music is not about hearing any more than language is. She's making the point here that music is so much more than just hearing. Music is a way of communicating with other people. It's a way of expressing yourself. Not just because we need to interact with other human beings, but because it is creative and it's incredibly rewarding. Another deaf musician I know said, I think musicality is something that exists irrespective, completely aside from hearing. That and Ruth's comment do sound like big philosophical statements, but we all know that there is clear scientific evidence why they are true. The way we understand music is far more complex than how we hear. Music can be completely unaffected by cases of amnesia, aphasia, dementia. It can sometimes be that singing, playing music are the only things that someone can remember how to do and the only way they can communicate when other parts of their brain have faded. Oliver Sacks' book Musicophilia and Dan Levitnan's book Your Brain on Music contain lots of stories about how music is processed in different parts of the brain. So it shouldn't be a surprise that our ability to hear with these things does not have an effect on our ability to be musical. What is more surprising is this constant, persistent idea that a deaf musician is something that just cannot exist. Most people know of Evelyn Glennie, the deaf percussionist. She and I have known each other for over 30 years, and we have played together a long time ago, which in human terms is ridiculous. You have a deaf pianist accompanying another musician, percussionist, who can't hear. What we do, we just memorize what we're doing, and we watch each other the whole time. It's wonderful when you work with another deaf musician, it really is. But Evelyn, on her website, says this: the definitions of the category deaf, not being able to hear sound, and the category of music, which is sound, are mutually exclusive. My career, said Evelyn, like that of Beethoven and a number of others, is an impossibility. So there are three possible explanations. One, I am not a musician. Two, I am not deaf. Or three, those categories, those definitions of music and deaf must be incorrect. And she's dead right. Evelyn is right. Just because someone is deaf doesn't mean they hear nothing. And that's particularly true now with technology and cochlear implants, though most of them are not that great for listening to music. Music is so much more than what we perceive with our ears. People who lose their hearing later in life don't lose their musical ability. They might lose their confidence, but that's not necessarily their fault. People who are born profoundly deaf, like me, most still have a sense that they're musical. They want to learn about it. They might find they're good at it. And then when they grow up, they identify as musicians. Going back to Beethoven just for a moment, there are some people who say that they find evidence of his deafness in his music. I'm not entirely sure. Back in 2000, someone published a paper in the Beethoven Studies Journal saying that the third movement of the Fifth Symphony shows Beethoven using his music to confront his experience of going deaf. The argument is that at the beginning of the third movement, it gives musical expression to three symptoms of deafness that Beethoven had. Firstly, there was buzzing and rumbling in his ears, which is shown in a recurring figure in the violins and violas. Secondly, there was difficulty in hearing quiet and soft sounds, and that is expressed in the low dynamic level of the third movement. And thirdly, the difficulty in hearing high-pitched sound, which is expressed in the gradual vanishing of those upper registers. And then that C major at the start of the fourth movement represents Beethoven's triumph over deafness. Really? I don't see it. I really don't see it. But then, as I've said, I don't see anything autobiographical in Beethoven's music anyway. Lloyd Coleman, who I mentioned earlier, thinks he does. And because Lloyd is a composer, I respect what he says. And he's deaf as well. This is what he said at the conference a few years ago. If you look at the Ninth Symphony and some of the unidiomatic choral writing, and you look at some of the later piano music, particularly the left-hand piano writing, you know that a lot of other composers just would never write that sort of thing. And I think it's to do with his deafness. I don't know, said Lloyd. Maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but I think it does have something to do with increasing deafness. I haven't written the book yet, so I can't give you all the evidence. But maybe it gave him some sort of doggedness. It takes a certain sort of person to be adventurous and to create music in that way. And I think Beethoven's personality might have been influenced by his deafness and then influenced his music. That's what I think, possibly. The book's coming out next year. Well, that's what he said. And he still hasn't written the book. It's now about 6 years later. But I have asked him if he still thinks the same thing. And he replied, no. It was just a hunch. It was just a thought he had. And that when listening to what he called greater knowledge of people like Barry Cooper at the University of Manchester and me, he thinks, no, it's probably not there. I don't know. People have their own viewpoint, but I will always listen to and respect someone who is deaf and has got that experience. We all know that whatever the situation, Beethoven did triumph. 250 years on, we still celebrate him. We still listen to all his music. Maybe if he was born in a later generation, things would be different. If he was alive today, of my generation, maybe things would be very different, because universities or music conservatories would say, no, you're deaf, do not come here. Perhaps he would be forced to do oral tests. No, it's a fact. Deaf people hate doing oral tests. Our ears don't work, but they're a part of exams. We all suffer for our art. Beethoven did, I do, Evelyn, Ruth, Lloyd, all these other people do. But what we are all grateful for is for those people who look at our ability rather than our disability. So, I'm coming to an end, and I can hear you go, thank goodness. Right? To close, I'm going to go back to that question that I asked earlier. What is music, and how would you explain it to someone who can't hear it? It may be that some of the things I've said have made you think. And over the years, I've had lots of people explain to me what they think music is. But two particular examples stand out. One of them, I don't really need to repeat now because it's very similar to what Jerome said. Thanks for ruining my speech. That's a joke. For the last 8 years, I've been lucky to work with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra doing a field of music project, which brings music to deaf children, leading music workshops in various countries around the world. One of the earliest projects we did was actually in Brussels. That was in 2013. I was desperate to come back and see a bit more of Brussels this year, maybe in the future. But anyway, when I do a project with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra, we always have a workshop first where I work with 3 or 4 musicians. And I ask them this question, what is music? Most of them will try and explain it. They will talk about pitch, vibration, they'll talk about emotion. But there was one guy we had, he was either a cellist or a double bass player, I can't remember what. And he said, without even thinking, I can't tell you what music is, but I can show you. And he just immediately picked up the bow and he started playing. Music isn't something we talk about, it's something that we do. We make it, we share it, and it moves us. And the other one came just a few weeks ago. I've been filming some songs in British Sign Language for a school, and the pupils sent me a large pile of thank you cards. And among them was a little drawing with some words on it, which I know you can't see very well there. And what this little girl wrote was, you hear best with your heart, not with your ears, which is absolutely true. Music is something that comes from there, not from there. I'm often asked if I'd like to be able to hear. No, I wouldn't. I am used to hearing and understanding music in my own way. I'm not saying that it's better or worse than anybody else's way of hearing music. I've never heard properly, so I don't even have the memory of sound when I was young. But being deaf is what makes me me. If I could hear, I would just be another musician. Yeah, I might be a good musician, but the deafness is a huge part of what makes Paul, Paul. I hope that what I have said in the last 40 minutes or so has given you a little bit of insight into my world, that challenge you to think about how you make and how you experience music. It's been a great pleasure doing that. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. This was amazing, and I have actually a lot of reactions I would like to propose you, but let me choose one or two. I think we do understand that all what we are missing if we think that listening to to music is limited to our ears, because what you show in your text is in your lecture is actually that it is through many more different things that one can enjoy music. When you talk about this C major chord in the Fifth Symphony, with your hands and your eyes, I could see that you were actually hearing the sound of that chord, even if you probably did not hear such a chord ever in your life. So you talked about this access to music through the score, making the music live into your head and your heart before everything. But can we say that there is already a kind of emotion for you in the score itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't need to hear it being performed. I remember years and years ago, I went to a concert locally, and Simon Rattle was conducting. And afterwards, I went and I met him. I've done this all my life. Any musician, even when I was a go up and say, "Hello, I'm Paul, I'm deaf. Let's talk about music." And Simon Rattle saw me with this enormous pile of score. And he asked me who finished first, him and the orchestra or me. And I said, no, we both finished together because I was following you. That's not answering your question, obviously. But yeah, I can sit here with a score, read it, and I can still have an emotional response. It won't be the same response as it would in a concert hall, because, as I said, that live experience is so much better. And it will be better in the concert hall. But yeah, I can still just get moved by reading something.
All right. So if I did follow you properly, you said sometime in your lecture that music is about communication of our emotions. Is it for that reason that you play and that you don't limit yourself to what you can enjoy through reading this and hearing the music into the scores?
Yeah, it's very much about communication. It's fun learning a piece of music on your own. And in performing music, we spend hours and hours alone developing the technique, learning that piece of music, spending time with it. But it's only become a living, breathing, emotional thing when you share that with other people. You can make it on your own, but it's so much better sharing it with other people. And communication through music and the art is something that we are so in need of this year. There are so many people who are feeling bereft, that's completely lost because they cannot access live music. I haven't been to a live concert this year, but I have been to one of my sign language choirs. We did manage to meet back in August for a couple of weeks, and I could just remember standing there, putting some music on, starting to sign, watching everybody else, and just crying like mad, because it's such an emotional thing, being together with other people, sharing that music. We need it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, music is about sharing, and we can see that these days with the exhibition Hotel Beethoven, with all the digital concerts that are organized everywhere in the world at the moment, even if the venues are closed. Could you just, to end, tell us a few words about the way you bring deaf people to music? I've been saying in the beginning that you were actually the founder of Music and the Deaf, that you are working on the Field the Music project of the Mahler Chamber Orchestra. What would you typically do when you have a deaf kid in front of you to introduce him to this incredible universe, which is music?
That's kind of two approaches here. The first thing I will always do is start exploring rhythm. Rhythm is the foundation of all our music. And it's something that you can feel, you can internalize, and something you can see. So I want people to try and develop that inner sense of rhythm, something that they can speed up, slow down, subdivide, or whatever. And I usually do this by doing games. Sometimes it might be something in a circle where we're doing body percussion and working together. But I also have a very simple game, which I'm going to play with you now. Right? I'm chatting about how I do it. I haven't done it for months. No, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to embarrass myself. It's amazing how much you forget when you've been stuck at home for 9 months. How fun. Back to the MCO. What we do there is we let the children explore all of these musical instruments. It's so important that they have that hands-on experience. You need to pick it up, feel it. Is it something that you blow? Do you bang it? Do you scrape it? If you imagine a circle of people, and on the other side of that circle, there is someone playing an instrument that you have never heard, that you have never picked up. Even though you can see it, you can't begin to imagine what it feels like. So you've got to actually get it for yourself. Somebody might show you how to play it. Otherwise, just bang, blow, explore it for yourself. And through that process, children will find something that they like the feel of, the sound of, and they can start to express themselves through it. And it's always a wonderful experience for the entire orchestra when they find a young deaf child picking up an instrument and making a sound. For some of these children, particularly those who rely on sign language, not on spoken language, the ability to even blow is really, really difficult. And we see time and time again, these children, some of them for the first time in their life, actually being able to create a column of air and making a sound. And it's life-changing for them. And it's for the teacher and the musician. You're giving them something that they have never had before, which they can then take right the way through their life. If you can open that door, unlock that door, and let them through it, it's fantastic. And I'm particularly impressed with the concert hall in Dortmund, because ever since we did the first project in Dortmund, the concert house now makes sure that every time the orchestra go, they will find the funding and they will do some work with local deaf people.
Right. Thank you very much, Paul. I would like to say that there are many videos of you on the internet, and I would like to propose people to Google you, Paul Whittaker, on internet, and follow you in this incredible adventure that you are building up with this deaf, young, and less young people. My last question would be related to our tradition in this series to ask our guests to choose a work of Beethoven that they particularly enjoy. So what would be your choice, Paul?
There's a lot of Beethoven that I really love, but trying to pick one was difficult. People would assume that I would pick a piano sonata because I play the piano, or they might assume that I would pick Beethoven 9 because it's big and it's famous. But no, I actually picked the Violin Concerto. In some ways, it's a very traditional classical piece in structure. So you think. I first came across it when I was about 14 or 15. My music teacher at school played it, and I thought, from incredibly simple openings in the first movement, Beethoven goes off on this incredible journey. I mean, how many concertos or pieces of music just start with a symphony going bum, 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 bum? You can't get anything simpler than one note repeated 4 times. Even the first movement of the Fifth Symphony has got 2 notes. The Violin Concerto has 1 note. It's got a gorgeous tune. When the violin comes in, it doesn't start playing the theme. It starts playing a cadenza. Well, what's going on here? In the second movement, you've got this gorgeous theme and variation. Again, it's a really, really simple tune, but the way that he embellishes it with the violin is fabulous. And then to finish off with, you've got this cracking round-off. It's lively, it's enthusiastic. You can sense Beethoven's enjoyment of life. You get his sheer love of making music, his adoration of the violin as an instrument. But at the same time, you can sense that he's trying to push the boundaries and do something completely different. It's just fabulous piece of music.
Thank you very much, Paul. Well, I hope that we can have you soon in Brussels to entertain also our public here with all your stories, your good ideas, and maybe to talk how to improve things for deaf people also in Belgium in our concert halls. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I wish you a pleasant evening, and I hope that we can meet soon. And thank you to everyone for being here also, and we hope to see you in BOZAR for our Hotel Beethoven exhibition, which is still open at the moment. And we also invite you to follow all the Beethoven story on the different websites, the website of BOZAR, our Facebook page, Instagram. You will find a lot of different information and projects. So thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. And goodbye.
My pleasure. Thank you very much today for having me.